So let's say you found the skeleton. How would you tell it to die? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, hey, good morning or good afternoon or good evening or whatever it is for you guys. This is the Dapper Dino live stream about Spirit Science episode 4. I actually thought that we were going to finish this video at episode 1, but there is interesting news regarding this series. Okay, look, I really don't like Jordan, and Spirit Science makes my brain hurt. However, I like having something that I can do on Saturdays. And Jordan just released another hour-and-a-half long video all about the physics of light. And he's just as bad at physics as he is at history. So, I might start doing physics of light stuff from Jordan in the next few Saturdays. So this might end up being a kind of regular thing. It might just be Spirit Science Saturday. It's just a thing. At least for a little while. So, you know, we can do Kent with Bent on Tuesdays and Spirit Science on Saturdays. So, I hope everyone is doing well. I'm seeing 24 of you are viewing, but only 10 likes, so come on, guys. Also, I want to say Carrie Bronson sent a super chat before the stream started, saying that this super chat was for the Void. May it take away your troubles, I think? I don't remember. And of course, you know, YouTube deletes it, so I can't easily get it again. But thank you very much, Carrie Bronson. That was for $5 US. And, of course, we now are at the 1-year anniversary of my membership program, which is why a few of my members now have a Ceratosaurus skull instead of a top hat. They get 1 more year, and they will unlock the final evolution of the badges for members. So I want to say a very special thank you to all my channel members. And, of course, if you are a channel member and you do not currently have access to the channel member/patron Discord server, please let me know if you do want it, and I will send you a one-time use link that will expire, so you're going to have to use it within a few days of me sending it. But yeah, please do let me know if that is you. I know that I've gained a few members who I don't think have reached out about that. You can put it in, I mean, you can say something in a comment or something, and just let me know how to reach out to you. Or you can send me something on Discord or Twitter or something, and yeah, I will get that to you. But anyway, let's talk about what happened last time. So when last we left off, we were talking about the Egyptian god Osiris and how Jordan here thinks that Osiris was a real person who lived in Atlantis and who was cut to bits by, I think he said his brother, because that's how it is in the legend of Osiris. And then his wife and sister, 2 different people, even though in the legend that's the same person and it's Isis, went and put him together and brought him back to life. Even though in the story, in the actual legend, it also requires Anubis' help, you know, the god of embalming and mummification. But it doesn't seem to in Jordan's version. So, not sure there. But then Jordan goes on to say that this scene is depicted throughout Egyptian art. And he's going to tell us why. And I decided to stop us last time right when he was going to tell us why the scene of Osiris is plastered everywhere in Egyptian art. Now, before we get going, what I am going to do is tell you the actual reason, for real, why the idea of Osiris is all over Egyptian art. And it is because Osiris is the prototype for the afterlife of humans. So, in Egyptian mythology, you had 2 different kinds of spirits or souls or whatever, but they were essentially permanently tied to your body. And so, without a body to inhabit, they would simply wander the earth forever. And Osiris, having been brought back to life by Anubis because Anubis is the god of mummification, that is the way that humans can be brought back to life. By mummifying someone, you preserve their body so that the spirit always has some attachment point that it can anchor onto. And so that is, since that's the prototype for, you know, immortality or the afterlife in the Egyptian mythology, and Egyptian mythology was largely centered around trying to make sure that you had a nice, comfortable afterlife. Well, of course, that central myth ends up being all over the place. But let's see what Jordan has to say about it.
Osiris went through the 3 stages of consciousness. The first one was whole, the second was separated from itself, included physically, and the third was whole again.
Okay, well, this is the first time I've heard that the second stage of consciousness is separated from itself physically. Because remember, Jordan thinks that we've had people, or maybe we have people right now who are at the second level of consciousness. But I don't see a whole bunch of not disembodied people, but like chopped up people walking around. So that's a little crazy. And also, he says that during each of these stages of consciousness, you grow several feet, or in some cases, even dozens of feet. So, did Osiris come back being giant after this? So, oh, and Dr. Osiris says that Osiris is actually your real life surname. That is an interesting surname. I don't think I've ever met anyone with that surname.
The Nacals used Osiris's understanding of how he became immortal as a template for how others could do it as well, only through consciousness, without needing to be cut up, of course.
Why not? So that's another thing. So apparently your consciousness is chopped up or separated from itself. What does that even mean? See, consciousness isn't like a physical thing that you could cut in half, right? Things have some degree of consciousness, but it doesn't really mean anything to have a half of a consciousness. It's sort of like saying that someone's like half pregnant. Like what does that mean? Does that mean that a half a fetus is growing? Like yeah, what, a half a consciousness or like a part of a consciousness? I guess I don't know. Like could you say that someone's like left leg is pregnant but the rest of them isn't? Doesn't make any sense. So yeah, Jordan needs to do a much better job of defining his terms because he just gets into all this crazy woo stuff that doesn't really make sense. And by the way, please do hit like. I'm seeing 46 people here and only 19 likes, so that's more than half of you haven't hit that like button.
This eventually became what we would call the religion of Atlantis, but it was more of a deeper understanding that they were following. This template was also used in Egypt, which we will look at now.
So it wasn't a religion, it was a deeper template. But what does that mean? So a religion, it's not always super easy to define a religion because even though Ra likes to say that he has a good definition for religion, it doesn't actually meet a lot of Near Eastern religions that were practiced in the ancient world, like in the Bronze and Iron Ages, wouldn't actually even meet his definition. But religions seem to be some kind of system of beliefs and practices that involve some kind of ritual and which are shared across some group of people. And it tends to play roles in things like social cohesion and community building. So if the Atlanteans or the Egyptians, which at least the Egyptians are a real group of people, are practicing some kind of set of ritual actions associated with some kinds of belief about the afterlife, that's a religion. And it's a religion, and it would be a religion in Atlantis if they're also doing that. So, I don't know.
Through this stair-step evolution, we began to change from the first level of consciousness into the second. Before the fall, we had incredible memories. It wasn't this vague recollection that we have now, but today we might see it as full-tilt 3D holographic memory.
So, you know what? Here's my only real response to that. And it's the only real response that's needed. What evidence is there that humans ever had 3D holographic memory? What does that even mean? You don't even really see in 3D, right? So when you have a sense of depth perception, what you're actually doing is you're comparing two different 2D slices of the world that differ, and because of the in position, and because of that, you can use parallax to triangulate in your brain where things are. But when you're looking at a 3D world, at best you can only ever get multiple 2D slices of it, and then you can infer third dimension information from them. So you can't even see enough to get a 3D hologram of something. So I don't even know.
After the fall, we still had a photographic memory and could share these experiences with each other, which is called dream time. It is what the Aborigines of Australia still have today.
Okay. So the claim now apparently is that the Australian Aboriginals have photographic memory that they can share telepathically with each other. I don't think they do. I've never heard anything that would actually indicate this. And the thing is, that would be a pretty significant anthropological finding to find out that all Australian Aborigines are psychic. Like, that would not be a tiny little thing, a little footnote somewhere. Like, I'm sorry, an entire continent's worth of people just happen to be psychic. And why is this? Which is actually one of the things I find is kind of annoying in a lot of New Age circles, is this sort of fetishization of certain groups of native people, especially people who either still or only still are more or less Stone Age in technology, or only recently came in contact with the sort of modern global society and started adopting modern technology. So you'll see that with like Australian Aboriginals. You'll see it with various tribes in, say, like the Congo or the Amazon, or relatively little contacted tribes in like the Andaman Sea. You know, so these are all places where you have people groups who are essentially living hunter-gatherer lives, and who have had essentially no significant contact with, you know, global society, with our current global technology level. And there's this weird sense that, oh, these people have special mystical powers because they're uncorrupted by modern society. And the fact is that no, they're people. They're people like everyone else. They have their own beliefs, they have their own desires, they have their own religious rituals and whatnot. But there's no evidence that being a hunter-gatherer in Australia gives you psychic powers because you're more connected to nature or anything. You can go be just as connected to nature while having an internet connection. Just go out and have fun in nature and go do some survival stuff if you want to. It's not going to give you psychic powers. And if you want to claim otherwise, you're going to have to provide actual evidence that these people have some kind of mystical connection. And I actually think a lot of it is just sort of a bias against traditional Western forms of religion, which, I mean, I'm not going to tell you not to have that bias, but don't let a bias against things like Judeo-Christian traditions and religious ideas, or Abrahamic religious ideas in general, make you buy into the not better attested claims of psychic powers by, say, you know, African shamans or something. Like that doesn't actually work. There's no evidence that anyone has these powers. So keep going after a little tirade there.
Through the introduction of writing, however, we began to change from the first level of consciousness into the second. We lost our incredible memories and became very separate from each other and ourselves.
Okay, so here's one of the problems that I have here. Jordan has portrayed previously in this video, and in previous episodes, if you watch earlier episodes of this show from my channel, that the levels of consciousness are a steady climb in height and apparently ability, right? So, but the problem is now, Jordan is saying that the first level of consciousness is great, and then the second one is a step down, then the third one is a step up above the first one in the first place, and it's just contradicting his previous idea of this being a progression upwards. And you can even see it in his little stair-step diagram. And even though his axes don't have, you know, units or even labels, we can assume the x-axis is time, because he's always been talking about it that way. And the y-axis seems to be some kind of arbitrary units of consciousness, which I don't even know what those mean, but sure. So he has the stair-step thing going up in consciousness, but apparently when you increase your consciousness from level 1, where you have a photographic memory, and you learn writing, you lose your photographic memory and your ability to use telepathy? Why? So does that mean that now literate Australian Aborigines no longer can communicate telepathically, but also that they're farther down on the scale of consciousness than, you know, like humans from civilizations that are, you know, at the peak of modern technology? So they are still unevolved in Jordan's sense? See, all of these things don't really add up.
Thoth was the one who introduced writing, and if you look at ancient Egyptian culture, it even says, Thoth brought writing to us, as well.
Yeah, because he's the god of wisdom and literacy. Like, it's looking at an ancient religion and noting that they have a god for something doesn't actually mean that that ancient god is one, real, and two, the person who actually provided whatever the thing is, right? So, like, there's a sky goddess in Egyptian mythology, and I'm probably going to get the name wrong, but I think it's Nut, which is usually spelled N-U-T. I think that's her name, but check, someone Google it and yell at me because I'm probably wrong. But anyway, as the goddess of the sky, she's also the person who does things like provide rain. But the fact that the sky is conceived of as a goddess literally arching herself over the earth, that is also her husband, and therefore the rain is, provided by her, that doesn't actually mean that if you go up in the sky, you're going to hit a gigantic, large celestial woman. Like, these things do not correlate well to actual scientific fact. Now, if you want to say that, the sky is being personified in some philosophical sense, and that maybe then you believe that there's a personality that is attached to that personification, I don't care. Fine, whatever. You have fun with that. But yeah. Oh, I guess I did get their name right. It is Newt. Awesome. My time studying ancient Egyptian language and religion hasn't led me astray this time. Hooray! But so yeah, like, I just have to put it out there. You cannot use Egyptian religious ideas as a reliable guide to history or reality.
As well as many other things. Now that we were in the second level, over time things began to change, and a very serious problem developed, which if it hadn't been solved, it would have caused a major catastrophe in our own near future. Basically, in Egypt, the Ascended Masters had used Osiris' genetic coding of changing chromosomes to
We're back to changing chromosomes. Okay, so apparently, when you chop someone up into bits, they get more chromosomes. And then if you sew the bits together and revivify them, they get even more chromosomes. Because more chromosomes is better. So here's an easy experiment. You don't even have to chop anyone up. Go to any crime scene investigation unit and talk to the people who run the DNA analysis on victims and find out if dismembered victims have more chromosomes than victims who haven't been dismembered in murder cases. Now, I'm going to make a prediction here. Are you guys ready? I'm going to prophesy the future. And I'm going to prophesy that anytime you find a dismembered murder victim, they are not going to have more chromosomes than one who isn't. Yeah. Also, I'm sorry if you can hear doves, but doves have decided to, like, hang out right near my window. So, yeah. Oh, and science side up, he doesn't... Okay, so his source is primarily a guy named Drunvalo Melchizedek, who is a nutter who claims to channel the Egyptian god Thoth, or Thoth, as Jordan says it. I don't actually have a stance on which of those pronunciations is better. I just say Thoth, but whatever. So, yeah, apparently you get more chromosomes when you're dismembered. That checks out.
show others the path of ascension. They developed a system of 42 and 2 gods, with a lowercase g. They were actually called Neeters. Most will recognize this one.
Oh my goodness, Neeters. Okay, so, in the kind of half-baked archaeological pronunciation that's given for ancient Egyptian, the word for god is Decher, N-E-C-H-E-R, or T-C-H, whatever. And the plural is Necheru, with a U at the end, because that is the plural ending in Egyptian. So at no point is Netters right, or Neeters, or anything. I just know. Like, it doesn't really matter to Jordan's argument to get the Egyptian right or wrong, but, like, it just shows just kind of a sloppiness to get basic ancient Egyptian wrong. And I mean, Necher is not exactly a uncommon word. It occurs all over the place in monumental architecture, in papyri. It's everywhere, and it's one of the few words that's so common that it's almost always written with a logogram without a determinative or a stroke to indicate that it's a being used logographically. Because the logogram for God, which looks sort of like a little flag pointing towards the beginning of the line, is just so omnipresent that you don't even bother. That there's just no point in pointing out its determinative nature. And it's also such an important word that it actually gets pushed in writing out of its normal place and to be put at the beginning of sentences or inscriptions, even though it's actually pronounced later on. And also, it's so important that you don't even bother writing out the plural. Instead, you just repeat it 3 times because, hey, you might as well get as much favor from those Necheru as possible. So, yeah. And then this is not advanced Egyptian language stuff. This is like, I don't know, like week 2 of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics class. Like this is extremely basic.
His name was Anubis. There were 42 and 2 Neters who were representative of human chromosomes.
First of all, what is the difference between 42 and 2 and 44? And also, I'm sorry, so the ancient Egyptian gods represented human chromosomes. Which one represented which? And how do you know? That's what I want to know. Which one was chromosome 1? Which one was chromosome 2? Which one was the X chromosome? That's what I want to know. And also, since the X and the Y chromosomes aren't direct, analogs of each other, even though they are homologous ultimately, don't you need an odd number of deities because you're going to have a separate one for the X versus Y? And Dread Lindworm puts 3 flags in there, and that is similar to Necheru, except that the flag has to point to the beginning of a line, so you'd have to like X mirror those flags. So, yeah. But that is very similar to how you would write the word gods.
Each one of them showed a specific pathway of life or human experience, and people would follow these understandings to learn more about their life or their own reality.
What does that have to do with chromosomes? Okay, here's what we're going to do. Put 1 in the chat if you think that Jordan even knows what a chromosome is, and put 2 in the chat if you think he's about as good at genetics as Kent Hovind is. And I guess put 3 in the chat if you can't decide, but I know what I would put in the chat.
The problem developed when both Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt became more separated from themselves, and the meanings of these Neters were lost.
No, Upper and Lower Egypt didn't become separated from themselves. They became separated from each other. Each other, right? They were separate kingdoms at various times, and at other times they would be united under a single pharaoh. So, getting a lot of 2s, no 1s, so, yeah. Pretty sure that Jordan is about as good at genetics as Kent Hovind. So, the thing is, what does it mean to be separated from yourself? Right? Things aren't separated from themselves. They're separated from each other. So, if you say, let's say you take like a bowling ball, right? You saw it in half. The bowling ball hasn't been separated from itself. 2 halves of it have been separated from each other. This is just basic how the language works. It's meaningless to say that things were separated from themselves, and I think Jordan might not even know the difference between the words themselves and each other, because those are different things. They both end up having some kind... They can also both be used kind of in a reflexive sense, but yeah, they're not the same word.
Over time, the drawings of these Neters changed, and the meanings changed with them.
No, Anubis was never a god of death. He was specifically a god of embalming and mummification. He brought the art of mummification to the Egyptians according to legend, and that's how they learned to preserve their dead so that their Ka, or spirit, could have an anchor that it would recognize throughout, hopefully, eternity, so that it could continue on having an active afterlife. Anubis was never... There really isn't a god of the dead, and the closest you get is, in fact, Osiris, because he rules over the land of the dead as the king of the gods, and since the Egyptian religion was hyper-focused on the afterlife, and having a good afterlife, and getting to the afterlife safe and sound, Osiris, at best, is the god of the dead. But unlike this angry-face-looking Anubis, that didn't make him a bad guy, because death wasn't all seen as a necessarily bad thing in ancient Egypt. Just like it's not necessarily seen as a bad thing in all modern cultures. So, this is very, very annoying. Yeah.
People had no idea what they meant. Then it got worse, when the Egyptian king Menes merged Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt into a unified country. Menes also merged the belief systems, so now you had 88 gods that people were fighting over to decide who was really God.
What? No, you... Okay, look. The number of gods in the Egyptian pantheon has changed many times over the 6,000 or so year... 6,000 or so year period of ancient Egyptian history, right? So at various times, the sun god and Horus, the son of Osiris, would merge and they kind of split again. And what actually tends to happen is that which gods are seen as prominent and which ones tend to get merged depends on things like which temples were politically powerful, which dynasties were in power, and what areas those dynasties were from. And the count of gods and who was merged and who wasn't would vary depending on exactly which city you were in and which cult they found particularly important. But there was never this one-for-one merging of gods that would have essentially been parallel anyway, and then they didn't merge, they split into 88 gods or something. No.
This was an issue because now they had people not knowing what to believe, completely lost, separated from their understanding of their own divinity and God.
No. So the closest you can get to any kind of like chaos like this within the ancient Egyptian religious system maybe is with Akhenaten's attempt to enforce a sort of monotheism, which none of the temples liked, and they all got rid of the moment he died, basically. But other than that, like this isn't really a thing. The state depended so heavily on religion in ancient Egypt that you basically couldn't, and the religion depended so heavily on the state that basically no ruler would tolerate that kind of craziness. Because if you don't even know what gods are the gods, then you have no particular reason to believe in the divine right of pharaoh to rule as himself being a god. So it would result in a complete destabilization of the Egyptian society. So any pharaoh who found himself even approaching this sort of state would find it absolutely necessary to simply enforce some kind of orthodoxy, or at least a kind of plurality that wasn't so extreme that everyone could more or less get along. Yeah.
Things became separated further. People fought over which gods were really gods.
At no point was Isis promoted as a goddess to the exclusion of Horus being a goddess. And spoiler alerts, that's because Horus is Isis' son in basically every legend. I mean, look, you could have a fight between Horus and Ra, because certain times they merged and other times they split, and it wasn't clear to what degree they were different gods at various points. That might at least make sense. But again, even when they were split, it was never Ra versus Horus. They were simply separate gods who had similar functions in the pantheon, as both being tightly associated with the sun. With Ra, when he was separate, being a manifest or a sort of embodiment of the solar disk itself, and Horus riding and steering the solar barge, which directs or is the sun across the sky. You can see how it's a little complicated, so that's why the two gods sometimes merge. But yeah.
Today, we look back and say, wow, they thought there were so many gods, when really, this wasn't the case at all. Even with the help from the Tat Brotherhood.
What do you mean it wasn't the case at all? The Egyptians were polytheists, with that exception of that tiny little excursion into sort of monotheism or maybe henotheism. Like, we don't have any evidence that the Egyptians didn't believe that there were plenty of gods.
We just couldn't get it right. There was one short period of Egyptian culture that most historians don't really understand.
I love it. So Jordan's like, hey, all the experts on this, they didn't get it. Let me tell you what's up. Okay, Jordan, let's hear what you got to say. And for $5 from Rodent No Last Name, My goodness, why does anyone watch me when I can't even say simple words? Anyway, for $5, Rodent No Last Name says, you get the feeling he watched Stargate SG-1 while having a high fever, and all this fanfic is a fever dream. Yeah, that does what it that's what it sounds like, although I also suspect that while he had the high fever, he also took some ayahuasca. And so this is a combination of like ayahuasca trip fever dream while watching Stargate SG-1. Which, I mean, it doesn't sound like a good time to me, but I can see why that might end up with some crazy ideas. At what point does Jordan start talking about the Goa'uld? Dread Lindworm says, I thought Akhenaten was monotheist. So monotheist and henotheism are more or less the same thing. And it's not entirely clear the degree to which there was the exclusion of the existence of other gods or just the refusal to worship them under Akhenaten. I tend to lean towards it being that the other gods weren't worth worshipping and only Aten was, but other people have other interpretations, and because most of the monumental architecture of Akhenaten's reign was intentionally destroyed in the years following, it's really hard to get a great handle on exactly how he was thinking about the other gods. And for 99 pence, Dr. Osiris sends a big smiley face with some $ eyes. Thank you very much for your super sticker. It's very much appreciated.
As it's written in ancient texts and hieroglyphs, for 17.5 years, there was a bizarre new ruler that completely changed how Egypt was run.
Well, yes and no. I mean, he left a lot of the type of state apparatus intact. Like, you know, he didn't have some kind of radical tax reform or overturn the military structure or anything like that. He did, however, shut down essentially all the temples and raise new temples and a new capital city to the solar disk god Aten, which was new, but he was still primarily relying on a supposed genetic connection to Aten for his authority, and was using status as being at least sort of semi-divine in order to keep that sense of authority going.
And his name was Akhenaten. Before him, there were only kings. Akhenaten was the first pharaoh.
No. I'm gonna take a big old drink of my my beverage here. That was a bit stupid. Okay, so pharaoh. What does pharaoh mean? Well, pharaoh is both in hieroglyphics and in sound is directly and obviously etymologically related to the word for house, per. And one of the things you have to remember is that pharaoh is a Greek transliteration of the Egyptian term. So, per means house, and a means great in ancient Egyptian. So, per means the great house, and it referred to the mansion in which pharaohs lived. And just like today in the United States, you might hear something saying, oh, the White House has issued a statement regarding whatever world event. What they mean is that the president, through his various, secretaries and functionaries and whatnot, has released a statement. It doesn't mean that the literal physical building of the White House has somehow generated some statement to give to the press. So similarly, in Egyptian, very early on, the Great House is then, you start referring to the person who lives there by the name of the mansion, just like you do in the White House, when we say things like, the White House has issued a statement, or White House sources say, has nothing to do with the building, it's about the guy. And this became such a common attribution of you referring to the person in the house by the word great house, that in fact it then just became the word. And in fact, when you see pharaoh written in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, the word per for house is actually like a little square with an opening at the bottom to represent a door. It's a picture of the floor plan of a house. And then is a little arm, and that's because of the rebus principle, where the word for arm and the word for great had similar sounds. But then usually there's another determinative, or not another determinative, there's another one that comes after, which adds on to that sound, so you get a more clear understanding of the sound. But the way that that's usually written, pharaoh, in ancient Egyptian, is just with those three signs followed by a human determinative to tell you that you're talking about a person and not a building. So, yeah, The kings of Egypt were pharaohs from a very early period. Very early.
which meant that which you will become.
No, it literally doesn't. I'm gonna punch something right now. I just spent all of this time telling you literally how you write pharaoh in Egyptian and what the etymology nakedly is of pharaoh. It is not a rocket science here. It has nothing to do with that which you will become. I seriously want to throw something right now, and I just wish I could throw it at Jordan. This is just clown school level Egyptian linguistics. That is completely insane. I'm sorry. Sorry, this bit is breaking me a little bit. I don't know how to deal with this much just blatant nonsense. You can't even, like, pretend like, oh, well, you know, I can't really prove that that's not what it means. No, I can absolutely prove what it means with a book within arm's reach of me. I keep my copy of Gardner's Middle Egyptian Grammar on the table behind my desk. That's not at all what it means.
He was also, believe it or not, 15 to 16 feet tall.
I don't believe it. And you know why I don't believe it? Because we have all sorts of pictures of pharaohs drawn much taller than other people, and we have their actual corpses. You can physically go look at the body of plenty of pharaohs who were depicted as being much taller in artwork than other people, because you're using what's called hieratic scale, which is a common thing throughout even the modern world, where you draw important people bigger to draw more attention to them because they're more important. When you start finding the 15-foot tall mummies, let me know. Until then, no, he was not 15 feet tall. Also, we have the body of his son. He wasn't 15 feet tall. Apparently, I'm not allowed to tell people what words mean. But I'm not even trying to tell people what words mean. I'm trying to tell them the etymology. Which I know I said ambiguously, but like, God.
At least that's how he was always depicted.
No, he wasn't always depicted. He was depicted at various sizes, but usually taller than the people around him, because he was the pharaoh.
And had an elongated skull. Both of these aspects are related to Christ consciousness.
Apparently, so a Christ consciousness gives you a long skull. So apparently, everyone who's ever drawn Jesus, you got it wrong, guys. He should have a weird alien skull, apparently. So, bet you guys didn't know that. Jesus apparently had a weird long skull.
Akhenaten abolished all previous understandings of God and tried to instill a one-God understanding in everyone.
Well, he tried to abolish. He obviously failed, since Egypt almost immediately went back to its previous religious system after him. This one's really getting to me, guys. I'm not happy about this one.
After 17 years, the majority of Egyptians revolted and Akhenaten was killed, soon to be replaced by someone else, returning to the old system. What actually happened? To correct the problem, Thoth got the help from Ai and Tia.
Wait, what was the problem? So Jordan says, okay, Akhenaten installs a sort of pseudo-monotheistic religion in Egypt. Okay. Then his son, not necessarily of his own accord, because it is true that Tutankhamun, who was his son, was extremely young when he became pharaoh and didn't stay pharaoh for very long. So he was probably largely being controlled by advisors and whatnot. But, you know, we'll say his son brought back the old religion. Which of these was the good one? Is the monotheistic Aten worship the good one? Or is the polytheistic one the good one? I don't know. Jordan hasn't told us.
Who were the first immortals from Lemuria, and got them to mate interdimensionally to conceive a Christ consciousness being.
That's hot. Like, what? So they're having spirit sex so they can physically conceive a baby? I don't think... Do we need to give Jordan the birds and the bees talk? Is that what's happening right now? Do we tell him about how, like, just thinking hard enough isn't going to get you pregnant? Did Jordan skip, like, sex ed? Because, okay, boys and girls, I want to tell you something. Just like you can't get pregnant from sitting on the toilet seat or kissing too long, you also can't get pregnant by meditating a lot. That's not how it works. But let's see what happens, because wasn't there a scene like this from the first Ghostbusters movie? Yeah, I think there was a scene in which one of the Ghostbusters gets onked in bed by a ghost.
Thoth said that he worked with the previous kings of Egypt to help achieve this, and Egyptologists find that Akhenaten came completely out of nowhere.
What do you mean he came out of nowhere? He had a lineage. He had a father. This isn't some guy who appeared from nowhere. He was a prince until he became pharaoh after the death of his father, the normal way that it works.
It took some time, and there was a transitional period involving Amenhotep III, but soon Akhenaten was on the throne. Akhenaten used his time to bring Egypt back to a simple religion where there was one god, one reality. He used imagery of a sun disk.
Okay, well, let's read the Carrie Bronson super chat first. Carrie Bronson for $5 says, "Are you kids mating interdimensionally? Talk to them about spirit condoms before it's too late and you have a Christ grand consciousness." Those damn kids and their interdimensional sex. Oh my goodness. Okay, so each god in ancient Egyptian religion doesn't represent a separate reality. They represent aspects of reality. It doesn't make sense to say that, I don't know, Horus guiding the solar bark across the sky represents a different reality than Nut, the sky goddess, which is the path, which contains the path across which Horus is going to drive the bark, right? Nor does it make sense to say that Apep, the serpent who tries to attack the solar bark as it travels through the underworld on its way back to the east, is a different reality than, say, Geb, the earth god, which is essentially the embodiment of the actual physical dirt of the planet, right? These are all aspects of the cosmological conception of reality that the ancient Egyptians had. These aren't separate realities. Now, Akhenaten was trying to some degree, change the way that Egyptians conceived of their reality, but he wasn't trying to collapse a whole bunch of different realities into one. Yeah, JS says, sadly, Jordan knows about sex. Yeah, he knows a little bit more than any of us should. Because Jordan knows what it's like to do it not only without consent, but with explicit rejection. Which you shouldn't do either. But, yeah. When someone says no and starts crying, you don't even have the horrible excuse that they didn't say no.
To represent this. The priests in Egypt didn't like that because the religious beliefs were centered.
Those do not look like Egyptian priests. But I'm going to let it go because it's just an art style thing.
On the priests. Then he comes along and says, "You don't need priests. God is within you, and you can access God from within your own selves."
No, he said God is up there as the actual solar disk. That's why one of the most common depictions of Aten is as a solar disk radiating solar rays, which end in hands to represent the generosity of Aten in giving life. It's an outstretched hand in giving. Aten wasn't within you. Aten was an entity that existed as the solar disk itself.
Well, they didn't like that. He also pulled the military back and said, "Don't attack unless someone else attacks first."
That was actually a pretty common Egyptian practice throughout most of Egyptian history. Egypt actually had fairly small periods of colonial expansion, and rather than creating an empire that they directly ruled, instead what they tended to do was simply establish vassal states. So those vassal states would give them tribute in exchange for being more or less left alone. That's also why the Egyptian quote-unquote empire had a tendency to shrink at various times in history, because sometimes vassal states would just be like, well, what if we don't pay tribute? And frequently, Egypt proper was not willing to actually then attack. Of course, it also meant that if you stopped paying your tribute, they also wouldn't send defensive troops to you if you were attacked by outsiders, because that was another part of being a vassal state, was that Egypt was agreeing to send troops to defend your country if they were needed. But of course, when they failed to do this, as they sometimes did, that would usually also prompt the country in question to stop sending tributes, because, well, the tribute is supposed to be essentially a protection racket, where it's like, you get it it's with the mob too, right? When the mob says, "Oh, hey, it'd be a shame if something happened to this really nice restaurant," and then they break a chair or something. So why don't you pay us to protect this place? The thing is that when you pay the mob protection money and then someone else decides to attack your business, the mob does go after them, right? It's not like you're not getting anything besides protection from the mob with mob protection money, because anyone else who attacks your business makes it harder for you to give them the money they want from you. So it's in their interest to actually protect your business. The same tends to be true for vassal states throughout history. So when you attack a place and say, "Hey, pay us tribute and we'll protect you," you actually have to protect. And if you don't, well, they're probably going to stop paying tribute. But that is the big way that the Egyptian empire sort of grew and shrank. And it really never held on for hugely long periods of time, anything outside of Egypt proper. So basically from the delta of the Nile south to the cataracts, the first cataracts of the Nile. And that was really the only permanent land that Egypt maintained long-term throughout history.
The military didn't like him either. Plus, the people generally didn't like him, because they enjoyed worshipping their many gods. Eventually,
Or maybe they actually sincerely believed in them, and they were worried that Aten was threatening their well-being because he was displeasing the gods who were now no longer allowed to be worshipped. I mean, that's one of those things. People can have sincerely held religious beliefs. And when they have sincerely held religious beliefs, if you try to oppress them and force them to abandon those beliefs, or at least act like they do, it's going to cause discontent, because people actually legitimately think you're asking them to do harm to their own spiritual well-being, or to ignore the gods that they sincerely believe in. And also, I'm seeing 82 people watching, which is amazing, but do please remember to hit like. So yeah, it's not just like, "Oh, we had fun at the Temple of Osiris." No, the people actually had sincerely held religious beliefs. It's like, if after the U.S. attacked Iraq, and then it started to kind of fall apart, and large sections of Christians and Yazidis and also some Mandeans were severely attacked and persecuted for being religious minorities in Iraq. They didn't just go, "Oh, it's a bummer. I really liked, going to mass," or "I really liked being baptized in the Tigris," or "I really liked, painting pictures of peacocks and talking about emanations from the, Shaitan." Like, no, it was these people's sincerely held beliefs were being suppressed, and so they fled.
they disposed of him. After all that, what did Akhenaten do that evidently saved humankind? Well,
Nothing. He was forgotten entirely until, I believe, like the early 20th century, when his new capital that he built and was later abandoned started to be uncovered, and we found some of the only surviving inscriptions that weren't intentionally defaced, that actually had his face and name on it.
he developed a mystery school, with the intention of showing a small group of humans a way to ascend into the immortal state.
Well, this is just another one of those, citation needed, Jordan. There's no evidence of a surviving mystery school founded by Akhenaten. In fact, Akhenaten was... Oh, and Akhenaten died of plague. Yeah, I actually didn't know how he died, so I wasn't going to say. But according to the Venerable Bee, he died of plague, which seems entirely possible to me. I guess that blessing of Aten didn't work out as well as he would have hoped. But yeah, so in order to say that we have a mystery school, we have to have some evidence that Akhenaten was even remembered more than a few generations after he died. We actually have good reason to think that he wasn't, because as part of the ultimate punishment, he was stricken from history as thoroughly as the Egyptians possibly could. His name was scratched out of everything they could find. His face was scratched out. In some cases, even the solar disk of Aten was scratched out, even though there was some pre-Akhenaten worship of the solar disk under that name.
Usually, it took hundreds of years to reach the level of immortality, and Akhenaten had 17 years to produce results. This was a very close call, but he did it. He actually showed 300 individuals the path to immortality in this short time.
Who? How do you know? Who were they, Jordan? Just who?
So after the general population disposed of Akhenaten, these 300 immortals would go beyond Egypt.
Are you gonna? I really want to get some names here, and if one of them isn't like Jesus or Buddha, I'm gonna riot.
Thoth wrote in the Emerald Tablets that after
Okay, remember the Emerald Tablets, not real things. These are like mid-antiquity Hermetic texts that there's no reason to think were ever actually found in the form of Emerald Tablets, because here's one quick thing. We have multiple accounts of the finding of the Emerald Tablets, and they're contradictory, and none of them actually really make a whole lot of sense. So, plus, the idea of the Emerald Tablets comes from Hermeticism, or Hermetic philosophy, which already had syncretized Thoth with Hermes in the figure of Hermes Trismegistus, and these were extremely late developments in terms of Egyptian civilization. We're talking like down into the Hellenic period, right? So this is after Alexander the Great's conquest of Egypt. So this is an extremely late idea that we're talking about here. This does not go back to early Egyptian history. There were no ideas about the Emerald Tablets back in the Old or the Middle Kingdom.
ancient Egypt ended, he brought a man named Pythagoras into the Great Pyramid and taught him the geometry of the universe.
No, there's no evidence that Pythagoras ever went into the pyramids. I'm not even sure there's good evidence he ever went to Egypt, although I don't actually know, so he might have. It's not crazy. So the thing about Pythagoras was that he was part of a long-standing tradition of geometry in Greece, using certain geometric tools like a compass and a straight edge to do what's called construct various geometric principles. And he discovered that Pythagorean theorem, where, the sum of the square of the length of the two legs of a right triangle equal the square of the length of the hypotenuse. And he thought that there was some deep mystical meaning behind this. He also gave up on eating beans for some reason. Pythagoreans weren't allowed to eat beans. And then he came up with some interesting, shall we say, theological concepts about, geometry. But he wasn't hugely interested in circles upon circles, because he didn't really say much. He was more interested in things like triangles and ratios and the golden ratio and phi and whatnot.
That man then went on to found Greece, which...
To found Greece? I'm sorry, what? Pythagoras founded Greece. No one person founded Greece. Greece is a long-standing civilization that, while it had a bit of a hiccup in the late Bronze Age, wrote no last name for $2 says, what does an Egyptian car sound like? Onk, onk. Nice. Pythagoras postdates the founding of any major city in Greece by a very long time. By the time Pythagoras comes along, Greek civilization had already been long-standing and already came after numerous preceding and cultures with continuity with Greece. This is crazy. Maybe they meant he found Greece? I mean, maybe that's what he meant, but he said founded. And that's not an easy mistake to make. Found and founded, very different.
was originally built upon schools for teaching geometry and the Platonic solids and all of that stuff.
No! Schools teaching geometry and the Platonic solids grew out of the pre-existing Greek culture. Greek culture didn't start with Plato. By the time of Plato, there were already numerous different Greek dialects. The alphabet had already gone through major revisions. There was already ruins that people could go visit from previous Greek cities. There had already been numerous colonies founded throughout the Mediterranean as extensions of Greek culture. None of this is even close. This is as stupid as Afrocentrists who say that Pythagoras and Plato studied at the Library of Alexandria. You know, the library that wasn't founded until after they died. Yeah, this is that stupid. And Vandalia 1998, for $4.99 says, when you're done with the talking Raven Men, there you go, sorry. Everyone should come over to learn about photosynthesis with me and NES, so I guess Nintendo Entertainment System. Hope to see you all there. Alright, well, Vandalia, feel free to put the link there. So, yeah.
Filth lived a lifetime here as well, where he was known as Hermes Trismegistus.
Trismegistus. There's an extra little U in there. And again, here's the thing. The Emerald Tablets of Hermes are supposed to have been written by Hermes Trismegistus. The character that Jordan is here saying comes after the discovery of the Emerald Tablets. He can't even get Hermeticism right. Now, I'll grant you, Hermeticism isn't exactly the most well-defined thing, but the fact that the Emerald Tablets are a production of Hermes Trismegistus is a fairly well-established thing in Hermeticism. I just... my goodness. This is painful.
Akhenaten's immortals became a group called the Essene Brotherhood.
The Essene Brotherhood apparently are immortals. Okay, so what were the actual Essenes? The Essenes were an apocalyptic sect of Jews from around the 1st century of the Common Era who lived in a settlement called Qumran. They rejected the authority of the priestly class in the Second Temple, Herod's Temple, on the grounds that they had become corrupt. And they were very concerned with ritual purity. We find their ruins had a lot of areas for ritual ablutions or ritual washing. They were very careful to keep as to the Hebrew or Jewish dietary laws. They had copies of the Hebrew scriptures. In fact, the Dead Sea Scrolls are a production of the Essene community. They seemed to have had some relationship with what's called Nazirite vows, which involve things like not cutting your hair. But that's a little less clear. And they were expecting that the forces of evil in the form of the Roman Empire would fight an apocalyptic battle with the forces of God, in which the Essenes themselves would ultimately fight in some kind of big final battle of good versus evil. And of course, they all died eventually. And they also weren't something that persisted for terribly long. Like, the Essenes weren't entirely rediscovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls. We also have the archaeological site they inhabited. So, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go on a quick intermission, and I'm going to refresh my beverage, and I will be back with you guys for a little bit more of spirit science. And, I thought we were going to finish this video today, but even that is going crazy, because... yeah, apparently every, 3 seconds I have to stop to point out how completely moronic Jordan's take is. He can't even get the very basics of the timeline right. So, yeah, here we go. Here's a quick intermission.
I want to take a moment to talk about something serious. There is a problem facing late surviving non-avian dinosaurs in modern America. Hunting is very strictly regulated, and only allowed at certain times of the year. This means that for much of the year we have to rely on farm-raised food, which means money. If you want to help a starving dinosaur, please consider donating on Patreon, or buying from my merch store. Links are in the description. Please help. Dinosaurs all over YouTube are depending on you to help them through the hunting off-season.
Alright, I am back. I decided to cut the intermission a little bit short because all I was doing was getting new cold beverage. So there is one thing I want to mention before we continue on with Jordan, which is, hey, tomorrow is a pretty significant day. Tomorrow, the Earth reaches aphelion, from the Greek apo, meaning away from, and helios, meaning sun. Tomorrow, the Earth will be as far away from the sun as it ever gets. So there you go. That's a fun little fact. Also, for those of my audience who are in the United States of America, it's also the national holiday that represents on the wrong day the signing of the Declaration of Independence because it wasn't actually ratified on that day. But who cares? There's going to be fireworks if you like that. I myself am going to be celebrating Aphelion with some bison burgers and corn on the cob. So there you go. There will also be some beef burgers, but I figured that I haven't had bison in a while, so get some bison. So here we go. Let's keep going. No. No. Okay, so how do we know that Mary and Joseph weren't Essenes? Well, there's a few things. One, and now I'm just for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to take the nativity narratives of the Gospels more or less at face value, right? I'm not going to sit here and say whether or not Mary was a virgin or whatever, but I'm going to take the basic ideas as correct. Oh, gosh darn it. Sorry, I forgot to turn back on the sound here. Okay, we'll go back a bit.
Originally built upon schools for teaching geometry and the Platonic solids and all of that stuff. Thoth lived a lifetime here as well, where he was known as Hermes Trismegistus. Akhenaten's immortals became a group called the Essene Brotherhood. They first migrated to a place called Masada in Israel. Even today, Masada is known as the capital of the Essene Brotherhood. Now get this. In this brotherhood, there were two people in particular, a man and a woman. You might have heard of them. Mary and Joseph?
Okay, so there we go. That's what I was ranting about. Goodness. I'll tell you what, you guys, everyone here, join the Patreon or the membership program so I can afford to hire a producer for these. Because apparently I suck. And I need a producer. And yes, I did have to listen to this twice. Oh my goodness. So, let's just take the nativity accounts more or less at face value, except for those things that are maybe particularly contentious or that maybe we know didn't happen. Like, we know that there was no census where everyone had to go to the city of their ancestor, because not only did the Romans never do that, it would be kind of stupid too. So that definitely didn't happen. But we're going to ignore the virginity part and all that, right? So we know that Joseph and Mary ended up settling in Nazareth, which is not where the Essenes were. So they couldn't be a part of the Essene community without living with the Essene community, because you can kind of think of the Essene community as so you can kind of think of them as like a modern Israeli kibbutz, which is a communal sort of, not like in the political sense, but essentially sort of like a communist group where everyone works and no one has their own private property apart from the kibbutz, and everyone is provided with what they need, provided that they supply sufficient work to the community. Now, I know that many people here might not be super familiar with the idea of the kibbutz. So another way that you might think of it is sort of as like a monastic community. So where you have a monastery full of monks or nuns or both, and they all contribute to the farming and the weaving and the pottery and whatever else they need, and all is collectively used and distributed. You cannot be a part of this community unless you're physically there as a part of the community. So for instance, you can't say, oh, I'm a member of this kibbutz or this monastery, unless you live there. And then you can take trips away, but you can't live elsewhere and legitimately claim to be part of that community, because it's a community that requires physical proximity. So it's not like an online community. It's not like your guild in, some MMO where you don't have to physically be together, or a religion where you can practice it anywhere. It requires physical proximity to be in a scene. And we know that Joseph and Mary ended up settling in Nazareth. But further, we have the story of the presentation of Jesus at the temple. We also have at least the tradition in Christian history that Jesus was circumcised at the temple. And we have the idea that, now this is a bit tangential, but we also have the idea that Jesus' uncle was praying in the temple. None of this correlates very well with Mary and Joseph being Essenes. The Essenes didn't go to the temple because they thought it had been corrupted, and they lived together in a community that wasn't in Nazareth. So no, Mary and Joseph weren't Essenes.
See, it was part of the Ascended Master's plan that they would bring in a being who would show the pathway to Christ consciousness. He would come to Earth as a second-level being, a regular Joe.
I thought second-level beings were discombobulated. Shouldn't he come as a first-level being so that way he can have perfect photographic memory and memorize all the scriptures or whatever? I don't know. It doesn't... Look at me trying to make sense of any of this. Who cares?
And achieve Christ consciousness through the course of his life. Then, the ascension process, the transitional experience from the second to third level, would go into the consciousness grid that was still being formed.
Okay, but in the story of the ascension of Jesus that we actually have in Christianity, it's not about him getting to be 15 feet tall or whatever. He physically goes up into the sky. Now, since most Christians no longer believe that heaven is literally physically up there somewhere, you can say that that's some kind of a, like that he physically went up into the sky as a representation of the fact that he was going back to be, reunited with the Godhead or something like that. I don't care. I'm not here to come up with your philosophical or theological interpretations of exactly what that means. But yet nowhere does it say that God grew, or sorry, not God, but Jesus grew to 15 feet tall as he ascended into heaven and faded into some weird hex grid. Which, by the way, he couldn't even put a hex grid over a sphere. Like, that's just sad. Like, come on, Jordan, you can do better than this.
He was able to transition because he was originally from these higher levels.
What do you mean he was originally from these higher levels? I thought you had some transcendent beings. Who cares? Whatever. I don't even know. I don't even know what it means.
That man is known today as Jesus, although his name at that time was Yahshua ben Hur.
I mean, you didn't pronounce Yeshua very well because there's an ah in there, Jordan. Whatever. Who cares? It's fine.
If Yahshua had not shown up, we would not have had that ascension experience available to us today. None of us would be aware that these higher levels of understanding even existed, and we...
Why not, Jordan? Why couldn't the Essenes, as third-dimensional, higher immortal beings that were shown the way of Osiris by Akhenaten, who rejected the worship of Osiris, because, yeah, all that makes sense. Why couldn't they have just told us about it and demonstrated that it was possible by, just continuing not to die? That would be pretty darn convincing to me. If there was just a guy who had just been alive since the time of Akhenaten. Yeah, that'd be pretty good. In fact, actually, there's an entire movie that I saw once about that. It was a little B movie, and I think it was like The Man Who Lived or something like that. And it was about an immortal guy who didn't know why he was immortal, he just was. Michael E. says, what does a producer even do? So, I will answer that. So, when I am running these streams, not only am I sort of the host, but I'm also producing, which means I'm in charge of scene transitions, graphics that come up, putting together the scene, so you can see, like, I have the video up on a screen within the screen, and I have the chat up there, and setting all that stuff up. A producer is in the background, and they're in charge of keeping, like, audio levels good, making sure that things aren't muted when they shouldn't be, doing scene transitions, all that sort of stuff. It's actually, it takes a lot of skill to be a really good producer for live streams. And Yeah, it's a really handy thing to have if you can have it. But I am not going to ask anyone to produce for me for free. So until I can afford to hire a producer, I am producing my own videos here, or my own live streams at least. I guess I'm producing my own videos too. So Solar Harlow says Joshua bin means son of. They would have put Joseph or Yahweh there. Yeah. So look. I'm not sure where the bin her comes from, and I really don't care that much. So it's probably stupid. But like compared to thinking that Pythagoras founded Rome, it's such a minor thing that I barely feel like it's worth commenting on. Which is pathetic, but whatever.
We would destroy ourselves. According to what Thoth said, Mary and Joseph mated interdimensionally.
Oh, that's why she gets to be a virgin, because it doesn't count if it's interdimensional. Man. Well, there you go, everyone in purity culture. It doesn't count if it's interdimensional. So step into that fourth dimension and get it on.
Mary could have been a virgin, physically, but she mated with Joseph in a way that would allow a soul from a higher reality to come down to Earth and have a human experience.
Okay, so it wasn't actually a product. So it's an interdimensional mating. So it wasn't physically their kid, but it also allowed a soul from somewhere else. So it wasn't even like some kind of spiritually their kid. So apparently interdimensional mating allows you to become pregnant with alien spirit babies. That's what I'm getting from this. Sure, why not?
Usually, this is impossible to do otherwise. Through
Oh, well, of course. That's why we don't see it all the time.
Joshua's work, he came here just like us, a total human being, but he went through these three important stages: final death, resurrection, and ascension, and gave us these experiences so that we could access them down the road.
But I don't have this experience, right? Like, let's just say that that's all true. I didn't die and become resurrected and then ascend. I don't have that experience. What I have is a story about it that does not match closely with what Jordan is saying. So, yeah.
Now, as we all know, the story of Jesus has a missing piece. He was a child, disappeared for some time, and then showed up again when he was 30.
Okay. Saying that the quote-unquote missing years implies that Jesus disappeared it's a bit of a stretch, right? So, like, it's like saying, oh, hey, what did Abraham Lincoln eat for breakfast on the 48th day after his third birthday? I don't know, but it doesn't mean that Abraham Lincoln was missing on that day. There's no indication in any of our texts that anyone thought that Jesus disappeared or that anything mysterious happened. He just wasn't a public figure, and the stories about him don't detail much about him when he's not a public figure after the nativity narratives and the presentation of the temple, because guess what? It wasn't seen as theologically significant to the writers, not because some mysterious stuff is supposed to have happened. And look, I don't even know why I'm talking about this. I don't normally care what's, the gospel say in particular, as far as this channel is concerned, at least. It's just that if you're going to take these seriously, then you have to take them seriously. And we have no indication from our earliest texts about the life of Jesus that anything mysterious happened. And yes, the four canonical gospels are our earliest narratives about Jesus. There is at least one, and maybe two, texts, only one of which is fully extant, that are earlier, but they weren't narratives. They were collections of sayings of Jesus. So, in terms of actual narrative that tells a story about the events in some kind of chronological order, although to what degree some of the Gospels are chronological versus thematic is a little bit contentious, but whatever. Yeah, those four are our earliest, and by far the Synoptic Gospels are the earliest. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke are by far our earliest texts about a narrative of Jesus' life.
In a book called The 18 Absent Years of Jesus Christ, the leading theories about where he went was actually out east to either the Himalayan or Tibetan mountains, where
Okay, so this isn't a theory that has any kind of ancient backing to it, right? The oldest idea that you get of Jesus going out east is actually from certain sects of Islam that say that after the apparent crucifixion of Jesus, in which he wasn't actually crucified, He then fled out to India and ended up dying out there. And that's why, to this day, you can find an Islamic tomb of Jesus in India. But yeah, this is all just modern invention that's basically just trying to fill in the empty spot in the biography of Jesus presented in the Gospels with stuff that sounds cool, mostly to New Age types, who, again, remember, have a strong bias against Western religions and towards Eastern religions.
He became an enlightened guru. He brought his teachings back to the world after that.
But the teachings of Jesus don't greatly resemble Eastern spirituality. They are very obviously outgrowths of contemporary first century Judaism. Things like the resurrection of the dead. He was deeply concerned with the meaning behind the Mosaic Law, whereas no one out east would have even really known about the Mosaic Law, especially by as far east as, say, like India. There basically weren't Jews as that far east. I mean, there were plenty of Jews in, say, like the Sasanian Empire and whatnot, but that doesn't get you as far east as India. Jesus was very concerned with things like proper conduct in the temple. He seemed to be keenly aware and find important the distinction between Jews and Gentiles. Not a concern of Eastern Brahmic religions. He did not import anything like the class system that was ubiquitous in India at the time. Like, there just isn't any real concrete connection. The closest you can come is like, oh, well, lots of religions say to love people and be nice. Okay. That's great, but that's so vague that it means nothing.
If you remember from part 1, the Kundalini of the planet was residing in Tibet at that time.
I do remember that Jordan made that claim. I don't remember him backing it up with anything.
They were very spiritually adept people living there, and
no, there were many people, like there were in Jerusalem or all over the place, who set about their lives dedicating themselves to some kind of religious career, I guess, for lack of a better word. But it's not like India was particularly spiritual and other places weren't, right? Like, go through and look at contemporary literature from, like a couple hundred years before and after Jesus in both Jewish and Christian contexts. There was deep concern both before and after for various spiritual ideas and lessons and things, right? Like, read the books of Maccabees, which were written in the years and to some extent centuries leading up to the first century of the Common Era. They're deeply concerned with both the socio-political stance of the Jews, but also spiritual matters. You don't get some, like, oh, no one cares about spirituality in Jerusalem thing. They weren't less spiritual. But what they were was Abrahamic, which, again, New Agers have a bias against Abrahamic religions and towards Brahmic religions.
and remains so today.
We're talking about Tibet. Well, the thing is, Tibet, at this time, Tibet wasn't even really what it is now. The center of the Brahmic religions was very much even more so in India at the time. So it makes even less sense.
Now, on the topic of Christ, there's something else I'd like to bring up.
Oh, good.
The Lord's Prayer. Today, we know this as the only prayer that Jesus taught. But did you know it's actually a geometric prayer meditation?
The Lord's Prayer is a geometric prayer meditation? I did not know that, and I am excited to learn how it is. Because that sounds amazing once I figure out what the heck a geometric prayer meditation is.
A man named Bodhi McCoy spent over 20 years working with this prayer and analyzing it with sacred geometry.
What? I want an in-depth analysis of how you analyze a prayer with geometry. But, I mean, maybe we're about to get that. In which case, that's going to be amazing.
And has discovered some incredible synchronicities. In his book, Live the Promise, he explains how the original prayer, not the extended version mind you, has 7 segments or thoughts, which...
No. Okay, so 1 and 2 are part of the same thought, right? Because those are both part of the noun phrase that comes together. So the who just refers directly to our Father. It's a relative pronoun. So that's directly connected. I'll give you that 3 comes as a bit of a separate thought from 1 and 2. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done is actually 2 more thoughts, so we're back up to this being 4. Give us this day our daily bread. Okay. Forgive our trespasses, but then as we forgive those who trespass against us, is a separate one, so now we're up to 8 parts. And lead us not into temptation, 9. But deliver us from evil, 10. No, none of this works. I get 10. I would be curious to know how many you guys get when you try to analyze this. But, yeah. Okay.
Align perfectly with the 7 chakras as well as the 7 original branches of yoga.
No, they don't, because there aren't actually 7, Jordan. The only way you could do this is if you just arbitrarily divide it into 7, and you're also doing it in kind of the stupidest way. But the fact that you arbitrarily divide what's actually more like 10 thoughts into 7 is just a coincidence that you're assigning meaning to. Or, worse, it's an intentional result of bias, which you're then assigning significant meaning to, even though the only reason it was ever divided into 7 was because you thought 7 was a significant number in the first place. This is... it's just the Texas sharpshooter fallacy all over again. I know I talked about that in earlier episodes, but yeah. Jordan is like the incarnation of the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. So for those of you who don't know, the Texas sharpshooter fallacy is basically when you paint a target around the result that you got. So, for instance, if you say, let's say you deal out, so you thoroughly shuffle a deck of cards, right? So you got 52 cards, and they're in random order. So that is, I'm just going to double check 52 factorial, because that's going to be important. Okay, so you deal them out, and you say, oh my goodness, it must be a miracle, because the chances of me dealing out this particular hand is 1 times 8 times, sorry, is 1 in 8 times 10 to the 67th power. That's an insanely large number. And yes, it is. It is an insanely high number. But the thing is, there's no significance to it, because the decks of cards had to take some state after you dealt them. And there's no reason to think that this state is more significant than any other. And the analogy is, so you have this guy in Texas, right? And he shoots a barn with a pistol. And then he walks over to the bullet hole and paints a bullseye around it. And he says, look how great of a sharpshooter I am. So again, this is one of these things where Jordan is just like, oh, hey, look, after I just made up 7 as an interesting number, then I found a whole bunch of places where 7 come up. Hooray! No. You painted the 7 onto this after 7 already showed up elsewhere.
Bodhi teaches how to do this prayer meditation, as well as meditations him and his wife have developed based on the Lord's Prayer.
After meditations he and his wife have developed, he is the subject of have developed, therefore it goes in the nominative case, Jordan. You're an English speaker. Get it right. And no, I'm not normally going to nitpick people's English grammar, even as native English speakers. But after you got Egyptian so wrong, I don't care anymore. I'm just going to be a grammar National Socialist German Workers' Party member. Trying not to get super demonetized.
Called heart dances. It's
Heart dances. Okay.
really quite incredible to see how it all works with the pure geometries of the universe. If you wish to learn more, check out livethepromise.net.
Jordan, I would normally want to learn more, but you haven't told me anything that makes sense about this, so no. You just said a bunch of nonsense, and then said, hey, would you like to know more? As if this was like an infomercial from, Starship Troopers. No, I don't want to know more, because you haven't told me anything. You just said that some guy arbitrarily divided the Lord's Prayer into 7 sections for some reason. And that is also the number of chakras and schools of yoga, which I'm not sure why the number of schools of yoga is connected or important. You just found a few things that are 7, one of which is completely arbitrary. I mean, like, oh, hey, look at that! 7! That's not anything. That's nothing.
If you study Christian religion and Egyptian religion,
Which I have.
you'll actually find that they parallel in almost every way except
No, the only way they significantly parallel is the idea that the afterlife is important and there are certain things you need to do to get a good one. That's basically it. But I am very curious to hear what Jordan has as the parallels between Christianity and Egyptian religion. This is going to be great.
for the Egyptians' understanding of God. Most evidence shows that Christian religion came out of Egyptian religion.
No, it really didn't. It came out of first century Judaism, which was a very diverse thing at the time. Because here's one of the things you have to remember. At all stages and in all places, religion is complicated and diverse. There's always a diversity of thought and tradition and practice and devotion in any given religion. But everything about Christianity says it is an outgrowth of first century Judaism, which then, as it expanded into Gentile communities, started to take on certain parts of, say, Greek philosophy that didn't necessarily conflict with the Jewish ideas. None of it shows any significant connection to Egyptian religion. Just none of it.
And then later they went back and discredited the Egyptians.
I mean, they did do that. That's fair. Just a
Around 300
here we go.
AD, there was a council called the Council of Nicaea.
The first Council of Nicaea, but I guess at the time it still probably would have been called the Council of Nicaea, so here we go.
Which was the syndication between the Roman political and religious authorities.
No, it was not. So, at this time, Constantine had already previously decided that Christianity was the so-called official religion of the empire, which meant that in terms of actual civic religion, he had replaced previous Roman paganism with Christianity. However, the Christian church was not part of the state apparatus, nor was the state telling the church in general what to do. But at this time, because there was a major theological conflict that was actually spilling out into like street violence, the emperor said, hey, we have to figure this out. And so he called a council of bishops to figure it out. But the official relationship between the church and the state had already been established, and it was not their merging.
Basically, the religious leaders and political leaders realized that they could unite and impose more influence on the people and control society through their unity.
But the thing is, it wasn't until after this, long after this, until new emperors came around, that anything happened with regard to, say, Christianity actually by force displacing other religions, right? Constantine, until basically just weeks before he died, was still approving quote-unquote pagan temples being consecrated or even built in his honor, right? Constantine never at any point shut down paganism. It would require generations after him until people actually started using state power to enforce Christianity in the Roman Empire, and non-Christian religions persisted throughout the entirety of both the Eastern and Western empires' history.
It's right around this time that we begin to see the manifestation of the New Testament.
Again, that's wrong. The New Testament canon, all the books in the New Testament canon were being widely read before this time, but it wasn't until significantly later that we got the first actual list of New Testament books that is identical to the 27 books that we have today. The Council of Nicaea didn't discuss the canon of the New Testament. It didn't come up at all because it wasn't at issue. What was at issue was theological ideas about who Jesus was, or more specifically, what Jesus was.
Which was put together from scriptures and stories, some newer and some much older.
I mean, all of them were probably late 1st to early 2nd century, so I mean, yes, there is a difference in how old they are, but by a few decades. I mean, it's not like any of them were thousands of years old.
Which were renewed and superimposed on the life of Yahshua ben Hur, which today...
There is no evidence of a narrative text earlier than basically Mark. None whatsoever. There isn't even a hint in any of the Gospels of such a thing. It would be really interesting to find such a thing, but until you do, you can't claim that there were earlier narratives about the life of Jesus on which the Gospels depend, because there's no evidence of them.
Today we know as Jesus of Nazareth. The term Christ actually stems back from much before the Bible. It comes from the word Christala,
What?
which is a word that derives from the original 7 core audible sounds of creation.
Nope. Holy crap. At some point, Jordan, just get one etymology even remotely right. Christ comes ultimately from the Greek word chrism, which is oil, which then comes from Christos, which means anointed with oil, which then has the same meaning as Mashiach in Hebrew, which then comes down later in like Aramaic as something similar to Messiah or Messiah, which then gets turned to Messiah in Greek transliteration. And it all comes down to being anointed in oil, because in the Old Testament, anointing in oil is how various prophets indicated the blessing of God on political and religious leaders. So when King David is selected to be the next king by a prophet in the Old Testament, he's anointed with oil as an indication that he is the new chosen of God to replace King Saul. It has nothing to do with the 7 core audible tones of creation. No. Nope. Like this, and this isn't even controversial, right? Like this is just, anyone who studies the languages involved will give you this answer. This is not like, oh, hey, you're Dapper, you're listening to like, only conservative Christian and Jewish scholars. Like, no. Everyone who at all actually studies this in an academic field is with me on this one. This is absolute, complete nonsense.
When the creation of the universe occurred, the original tones were ka, ra, ya, sa, ta, ha, la.
What? According to whom? And how did you hear that before the universe existed or before air existed? What is any of this? No, this is all nonsense. We know the etymology of Christos. It has nothing to do with any of this nonsense.
Christla actually was broken down on Earth into 2 words, Christ, which soon became Christ, and Hla, which became Allah.
What? Okay, so Jordan is also getting Arabic wrong. Okay, Allah is a truncated form of al-ilah, and ilah is just the standard Arabic word for God. So you say Allah a lot, and it shortens very easily. That little I since it tends to drop out until it gets to Allah. In fact, the general word for God that you would apply to, say, like pagan deities or whatnot in Arabic is still ilah. And in Christian hymns that use the word God as an attribute to attribute, divinity to, say, Jesus, you still hear the word Allah. I know, because I've sung in a choir in an Arabic-speaking church. Weird fact about me, but it's true. And I've sung hymns that are more than 1,000 years old in Arabic. This is absolute craziness. Also, if the H is at the beginning of this word that becomes Allah, why is it the end of the word? Why does the word Allah, go backwards? I would be curious to know. But no, Allah does not derive from Ha or whatever. It derives from Al-Ilah, which just means the God.
Which were broken down and changed through oral tradition.
Oh.
The symbol for Atlantis was
a bullseye.
3 rings inside of the other. The inside were the Nakals, the middle ring were called Maya.
I just love that an ancient Mesoamerican civilization just are the inhabitants of Atlantis. They're not like the ancestors or anything. No, it's just them. They're just the Mayans. Okay, sure, Jordan.
And the outer ring were the Atlanteans. The Maya's job was communicating the messages from the inner circle out to the regular people of Atlantis. When
Thanks,
Atlantis
guys.
sank, the Maya took their knowledge, a crystal skull with memories of Atlantis,
Oh my goodness, the crystal skulls. Okay. I'm sorry. It's whew. Okay, I'm gonna try and not keep laughing because this is just batshit. Okay, so the crystal skulls. There is one remaining crystal skull that has not been demonstrated to be a fake, and it's the Mitchell Hedges skull. And here's the only reason it hasn't been demonstrated to be a fake. None of the people who've ever owned it have allowed it to be tested to see if it's actually just a modern forgery like all the others. Right? The crystal skulls are just modern archaeological forgeries to get money for the people who made them. That's it. They are all fake. It's a fun story. It was a stupid idea for an Indiana Jones movie, but that's it.
and their calendar, and went out to what today is called the Yucatan Peninsula, birthplace of the Mayan civilization.
Well, that would make sense. So I'll give Jordan that. That's the first thing that's made sense, that the Mayans went to found the Mayan civilization where the Mayan civilization existed. All that checks out.
Their calendar is the most advanced, detailed calendar on the planet, and it
No, it's not. It just has a larger number of concurrent cycles that don't evenly divide into each other than most other calendars. Like, it's actually sort of needlessly complicated. Like, our current calendar is kind of silly because we have months that don't really mean anything, and we have arbitrary numbers of days in the month that just happen to add up to 365, which is the closest whole number to the number of days in a year, and then we have a moderately complicated way to factor in the fact that the year doesn't actually last a whole number of days, which is already a bit more complicated than it really needs to be. Really, all you need is a calendar that runs from 1 to 365 and then has leap years, right? But the Mayans have all sorts of extra intricate little, like, oh, hey, we have this cycle and this cycle and that cycle. But that doesn't make it advanced. It just makes it like a Rube Goldberg version of the calendar, which, I don't know if... Rube Goldberg machines aren't exactly useful. They're just complicated for the sake of being complicated.
it has its roots in Atlantis.
The Mayan calendar has its roots in Atlantis. I think we all know what the deal is there, and it's that, we need a citation on that.
Over the last few hundred years, a group of people have slowly monopolized the entire world into what it is now. Today, there are 13 families that are among the richest families in the world.
That sounds like the start of a conspiracy theory, but before we get into that, I want to say that for $5, Rodent No Last Name has said, this would be an okay Michael Bay movie, needs more splosions though. It does need more splosions. Where's my splosions, man? I want more splosions.
They have their hands in next to every organization
Goldman Sachs, Exxon, the Vatican City, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, British Petroleum. What bank is that? I know that that's a bank. But yeah, okay, sure.
and government and control over 95% of the money. They control our modern world from the very tippy top. Today, we like to call them the Illuminati.
Do we like to call them that, or do you like to call them that, Jordan? Because the Illuminati was a secret, but not very secret, association of basically academic types from, like, the early Renaissance that there's no evidence still exists. And even when they did exist, they weren't out to take over the world. They were basically a book club that liked to do secret meetings.
Except that's not really who they are. The word Illuminati means enlightened ones, which was established long ago as a secret society that was focused around expanding knowledge.
Okay, so I guess the Illuminati are Jewish Masons? No, first of all, the Illuminati was primarily composed of people who we probably would have identified as Christians. It had no particular connection to Judaism, and the Freemasons are a separate secret society. Just...
through scientific and spiritual understandings. Secret societies were not originally bad, but
Oh, Enlightenment in Bavaria, not the Renaissance. Sorry, Venerable Bede. Yeah, there you go.
rather consisted of those who just kind of got it. They understood information that the average person at that time would not accept and demonize. These societies had to be kept a secret because of the control that the church had,
That is actually kind of broadly true.
and refuted against what they wanted to explore. This is where Freemasonry originally comes from.
Oh, the Nova Saber points out he got an etymology right. Yeah, he did. Congratulations, Jordan. You finally got an etymology right.
If you do the research on the time periods, what probably happened was that the church, who had the majority of the control at the time, probably
The church really didn't have the majority of the control at the time, and you can tell because continually, and we're speaking about the Catholic Church in particular here, so we can ignore the Eastern Orthodox or the Oriental Orthodox or Nestorian churches or whatever, right? So focusing on the Roman Catholic Church. So one of the ways that you can tell the church actually didn't have as much authority as it even would have liked is that it continually had to try to assert its authority to do things like select new bishops, because kings were continually selecting who the bishop was. And why is that? Well, the king has these guys with swords, so if you push too hard against the king, you just get stabbed. So, let's see. Wrote no less name for $2 says, also, this is the worst Barry the Dinosaur episode. But yeah, so the fact that the church also is continually trying to reassert the right of clergy to be tried by canon law as opposed to secular law, and it's continually also trying to reassert the rule of celibacy on priests, because priests throughout the Middle Ages were continually finding, or basically living with women as their wife, and sometimes even quote-unquote marrying them. And this was just the open, normal thing in most medieval areas of Europe. The priests were just ignoring the rule on celibacy and were essentially getting married. And so, yeah, it's... The church had a lot of power, right? Because their ultimate sanction was excommunication, which most kings tended to actually believe would deny them entry to heaven. But if you want to pretend that the church was in charge of everything during the Middle Ages, I mean, it just manifestly was not. Did it have more power than was wise? Perhaps. But, like, no, it was not in control of everything. It had to struggle to maintain the control it thought was proper to it. And it didn't even try to control many things. So, for instance, the church, there's really very little evidence of the church ever trying to control taxes levied by kings, or who went to war with whom in terms of, secular governments, or try to control the non-canon law aspects of the legal system in a country. So, for instance, if two non-clergymen were to get into a dispute in, say, England, they'd be tried under English common law, not canon law, and the church would have essentially no say in it. So, yeah, I mean, the church was definitely a significant player in terms of power politics in the medieval period, but it was not in charge of everything, or even close to it. It struggled with secular power power centers, and it did not always win at all.
infiltrated some of these organizations to make sure that they were not creating plans to expose information and destroy the world order that they had created.
The church never had a world order, right? Even if you expand it to include the non-Roman Catholic manifestations of Christianity at the time, Christianity had some kind of hegemony over most of Europe, parts of Africa, and like Turkey. That's not the world.
This led to the church exposing some of the societies as devil worship and blasphemous, and fear of these groups rose.
That part is reasonably accurate.
Over time, many secret societies branched off by those who were corrupt or previously infiltrated by the church.
Well, that's just going to have to be, another wonderful citation needed. Because most secret societies have, even in their own origin stories, nothing about branching off from other secret societies. Most of them are just de novo creations. Yeah, and then the Venerable Bede points out the church's power would grow and shrink throughout that time, and it did try to stop wars, but it didn't always work. Right. And then Philip Corda says, and there were two popes for a time. Yeah, there was actually a few occasions of more than one person claiming to be the legitimate bishop of Rome. Like, If you have the idea that the church was just in charge of Europe during the Middle Ages, it's just because you haven't studied medieval history. That's it.
And gain more control through the church and large organizations that were being established. Today, there exist 13 families around the world who pretty much own the world, with over 95%
You already said this, Jordan.
of the money, and a lust for greed, power, and control. More and more information
Are you going to name names, or are you just going to say that these exist? Sure.
has become present lately that many of these families may have DNA that is different than the rest of the human population.
Well, that should be easy to figure out, Jordan. Let's get some DNA testing done. My goodness.
It is speculated that they share DNA that was passed down from the Martian race.
The Martians. We're back to the Martians. At least we brought it back full circle, man. What were the Martians doing this whole time? They just kind of disappeared from the scene when Atlantis sank. Like, Jordan, your world building is incomplete here. I need to know. What were the Martians up to? The completely unemotional but somehow greedy and angry Martians. What were they doing this whole time?
Or other species races.
Oh, the other species too. Maybe like the reptilians, because remember, Jordan also buys into the reptilians conspiracy.
They contain no love or emotion and are
Okay. So, billionaires don't have emotions, guys. That's apparently what I'm getting from this. Sure.
completely power-driven. This brings us to the end of the human history story for spirit science.
Oh,
But
good.
of course, it's not really the end. For one, we've only really scratched the surface of discussing many of these topics. Secret societies, for example, would take another 2 or 3 lessons to really get into. Plus, the human history story won't end because we're still living it.
That part is true. History is not done yet. Thanks, Jordan.
And what happens next is ultimately up to you. This story, while seemingly unbelievable and at times outrageous,
It is unbelievable and outrageous, Jordan, which is why I would like you to give me more evidence before I believe this crazy nonsense. And it's not just unbelievable because it seems far-fetched, it's unbelievable because in many cases it's self-contradictory. It literally can't all be true at the same time.
does explain a lot. Think about it. We've covered the Bermuda Triangle,
You've talked about it. I wouldn't say you've covered it.
the face on Mars,
Again, you've talked about it. I wouldn't say you've covered it.
Jesus, what
Again, you kind of covered it, but what you said didn't make any sense.
the Egyptians were doing, the
No, you lied about that.
rise of Greece,
Lied about that too.
pretty much most modern religions.
You really only touched on Christianity, and what you said didn't make sense, but okay.
The reason we popped up out of nowhere 6,500 years ago,
We didn't, but okay.
the stair-step evolution of those cultures,
Which doesn't really seem to exist in terms of actual, like, history and historiography, but okay.
and the story of Atlantis, which has been elusive to us at the best of times.
And which you just went with made-up crap that has no ancient source.
It also explains the Great Pyramids and their connection to all of the sacred sites on the planet,
Which you allege, but did not demonstrate.
the Sumerian tablets,
Which you mistranslated, so you don't know anything about those.
the Emerald tablets,
Which again, you got the very basics of wrong.
Lucifer,
Which you barely explained except by name dropping.
and as for the Hebrews, if you read their Talmud, it actually seems to suggest that they're not from here.
Tell you what, I've never read the Talmud. Jewish friends and viewers of mine, let me know if the Talmud indicates that Jews are from the future of space. Let me know.
I'm not going to tell you to believe it, but it definitely puts some perspective on many questions and aspects about the world which we generally just don't have conclusive answers to.
Well, I'm going to tell you not to believe it, because it doesn't even make internal sense, and it contradicts almost everything we actually know about history.
Take it with a grain of salt, though.
Take it with a giant Mount Everest-sized grain of salt. That grain of salt should be so big that it crushes you when you take it.
After all, it is just a theory.
Oh my goodness. I'm so happy that theme music is starting up, because I'm not going to play through the theme music. And anyone who ever says it's just a theory is someone you should immediately dismiss. theories in the scientific sense, which is what Jordan is purporting to be with his title Spirit Science, are not just wild ideas that you throw out there. They are bodies of knowledge and explanations that have been thoroughly and rigorously tested and never disconfirmed, despite ample opportunity to have been disconfirmed. So, no, this isn't a theory. It's barely even an idea. So, anyway, with that, I'm going to have to say that we got through this almost exactly where I would have normally stopped the stream anyway, which is awesome. So I'll give a little bit of channel news, and then I will see you guys later. So let's see. Tuesday, we have Kent with Bent coming up. I'm going to actually pull up a calendar here. So we have Kent with Bent coming up on the 6th. Then on Thursday, the 8th, and of course this is all my time, we are getting the next speculative evolution video. I know it has been a while, but due to computer troubles, I got kind of knocked off of my flow with that, and it took a while to get back. So, wrote no last name for $2 says, seems to suggest vaguest statement ever. Yeah, it's true. It's extremely vague. So let's see. Saturday the 10th. I am not sure. It might actually be more Jordan because I have another video I've downloaded. Then the 13th. I don't actually know if I'm going to be doing Eric with Erica, or there might be a pre-recorded Kent with Bent. I have family visiting me around that time, so it will depend on exactly how that goes. Then the 15th should be the next Leaving Young Earth Creationism. The 17th will probably be another Spirit Science video. The 20th will be another Kent with Bent. I don't know what will happen on the 22nd for that Thursday. I have some ideas. It might just be the next after that Canadian Young Earth Creationism. It might be a re-upload of my debate with Flat Earth Aussie. That might also occur there. And then the 24th, Saturday the 24th, I am hoping to have Sal Cordova on. He's a Young Earth Creationist, and he is going to talk to us about why the second law of thermodynamics is a terrible argument against evolution. Because he actually knows enough about thermodynamics to know why that's stupid. So I went on his channel recently and talked about early Christian history. Check that out if you want. It's in my Dapper on Other Channels playlist. I had a lot of fun in that discussion. I think Sal had a lot of fun. The audience had a lot of fun. So please check that out. But anyway, yeah, that's it. That's about as far into the future as I can see for this channel right now. And I want to say thank you very much for coming. I think we had up to 80-something viewers, which is pretty good for me. And thank you very much, especially everyone who super chatted. But I'm going to get out of here and play the outro. And yeah, I hope everyone has a wonderful aphelium.
I just want to take a moment to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Bob Knob, Bent Hovend, Ian Chen, Chris Love, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, and Patrick Dennis. My patrons and channel members really help make this channel possible, and without them, this channel wouldn't exist. If you would like to support me, you can click the join link on this channel below this video, or you can click on my Patreon, link in the description, and pledge. On Patreon, there is an option for an annual subscription, which comes with a 10% discount. And joining the channel will give you access to my custom emojis. However, if a regular pledge isn't for you, I do have a merch store. And if monetarily helping out the channel isn't a thing you can do, every like, share, and comment really helps the channel.